Hello everyone. In this class, we'll learn about properties of nerve fibers. Important properties of nerve fibers are as follows. These are excitability, conductivity, unfatigability, refractory period, all or none law, summation, and accommodation. Excitability is the property by virtue of which cells or tissues respond to changes in the external or internal environments. It is due to the disturbances in the ionic equilibrium across the receptive zone of all cell membrane. Nerve fibers are highly excitable tissues. They respond to various forms of stimuli, that is mechanical, thermal, chemical, or electrical. In experiment setup, electrical stimulus is usually employed because its strength and frequency can be accurately controlled. The nerves respond well to chemical and thermal stimuli. The production of wave of depolarization, that is excitation or activation impulse, demonstrates that nerve has been excited. Conductivity. On stimulation, action potential is generated in the nerve fiber, which is propagated along the entire length of axon terminal. There can be orthodromic and antidromic conduction. An axon can conduct in either direction. If stimulus is applied in the middle junction of axon, the action potential initiated in the middle of it can travel in both directions due to setup of electronic depolarization on either side of the initial current sink. Impulses normally pass from synaptic junction to the axon terminal, which is called as orthodromic conduction. Conduction in the opposite direction is called as antidromic conduction, seen in sensory nerve supplying blood vessels. Axon reflex is an example of antidromic conduction. Summation. Application of subthreshold stimulus does not evoke an action potential. However, if subthreshold stimuli are applied in rapid succession, they are summated and they produce an action potential, and this property is called as summation. Accommodation. Application of continuous stimuli may decrease the excitability of the nerve fiber, a phenomenon called as accommodation. More than nerve fiber, it is the nerve endings that adapts. This decreases in the transmission of impulses across the neurons. If a nerve is submitted to a passage of constant strength of current, the site of stimulation shows decrease in excitability. The accommodation consists of a rise in threshold of the membrane during stimulation. A similar feature is observed at the nerve endings is called as adaptation. Thus the nerve fiber accommodates while the nerve ending adapts. Unfatigability. Nerve fibers cannot be fatigued even when they are stimulated continuously. This is because the nerve fibers primarily conduct impulses that do not involve expenditure of energy. All or none. Definition of all or none. All or none states that the action potentials occur with a constant amplitude and shape irrespective of magnitude of the stimulus. A subthreshold stimulus fails to excite the tissue. Only a stimulus of threshold magnitude elicits an action potential. If subthreshold stimuli are applied, the action potentials resulting from them have the same amplitude, duration, and form as those produced by threshold stimuli, provided the experimental conditions like electrical potentials on both sides of the membrane, concentration of ions in ECF and ICF, and temperature, etc., remain the same. Mechanism. The activation of gates of voltage gated sodium channels open as soon as 15 millivolts of depolarization is achieved. Following that, any extra degree of depolarization is of no further use, as the membrane automatically achieves another plus 90 millivolts of depolarization. Thus, after the threshold level achieved, the amount of sodium influx becomes independent of the stimulus factor. The number of voltage gated sodium channels over the axonal membrane of unmyelinated axons as well as the nodes of Ranvier in myelinated axons remain fairly constant. Once action potential is formed, it appears with its maximum size and shape, otherwise it does not form at all. Therefore, action potential follows all or none law. That is, the action potential occurs with constant amplitude and shape, whether the stimulus is threshold or supra-threshold magnitude. Refractory periods. During the action potential, the stimulated area of membrane happens to be unresponsive to second stimulus. In most part, the later, it requires a stronger stimulus to get excited again. The length of the time during which the membrane is unresponsive to second stimulus, no matter how strong is the stimulus, is known as a refractory period. The periods of total and relative refractoriness are known as absolute and relative refractory periods respectively. Absolute refractory period. The duration of absolute refractory period is defined as the period in the action potential during which application of second stimulus of any strength and duration does not produce another action potential. The absolute refractory period corresponds to period from the time of firing level is reached until repolarization is about 1/3 complete. Mechanism of absolute refractory period. At the peak of action potential, the inactivation gates of voltage gated sodium channel close and they remain in that inactivated state for some time before returning to the resting state. The sodium channels can reopen in response to second stimulus only after attaining resting state. Hence, even if a stronger stimulus is applied during this interval, it will not produce a second action potential and the membrane is said to be in absolute refractory period. Its physiological importance. The absolute refractory period limits the number of action potential that the nerve can fire in a given period of time. Absolute refractory period serves two important functions. ARP determines the rate of discharge of nerve fiber. In our body, nerves fire at the rate of 10 to 1000 impulses per second. Generally, a large diameter nerve fibers have an ARP about 0.4 milliseconds with a firing rate of 2500 impulses per second, whereas small diameter fibers have absolute refractory period of about 4 milliseconds with a firing rate of 250 impulses per second. The ARP is also responsible for one-way conduction of action potential. Relative refractory period. Relative refractory period is defined as the period following ARP, that is absolute refractory period, during which the application of suprathreshold stimulus can elicit a second action potential. The relative refractory period starts from end of absolute refractory period to start of after depolarization. Mechanism. Following factors contribute to relative refractory period. All the sodium channels present in the site of stimulus do not achieve the open state or inactivated state or resting state exactly at the same time. Few of them open when the membrane potential is minus 63 millivolts, causing local response. By the time of relative refractory period, some of the channels have returned to their initial resting stage. These channels in resting stage can open their activation gate and allows the influx of sodium. A suprathreshold stimulus can spread a larger area over the membrane and open extra voltage gated sodium channels. Thus, only a suprathreshold stimulus and not any threshold stimulus can open up sufficient number of sodium channels to elicit an action potential during relative refractory period. The excitability of the membrane keeps on changing in different phases of action potential. Usually the time of membrane potential is closer to the firing level, the membrane is more excitable and the excitability of the membrane decreases when its potential is away from the firing level. During ARP, it is least excitable. So this diagram shows the action potential, the absolute refractory period and the relative refractory period. Thank you.